Evet, devam ediyoruz. Ben oturum başkanı rolündeyim. Şimdi biraz tukaf oldu. Bizim iki yabancı misafirimiz var. Ben de yabancıyım, yabancı uyrukluğum. Ama çok uzun süre Türkiye'de kalıyorum. 16-17 yıldır. Ve şimdi misafirlerimizi size tanıtıyorum. İlk konuşmacımız doçent doktor Greg Simons, İngilizce geçiyorum. So we are starting our session, and our guest is Greg Simons, coming from Uppsala University, a well-known expert in Russian affairs, Russian politics, and in general public relations and propaganda affairs. And he will present, also he's working both in Sweden, Uppsala University, and in Latvia, in Riga also. And the title of his presentation is Geopolitical Regionalism Resulting from US-led Global War on Terrorism and Arab Spring, Implications for Turkish Defense and Foreign Policy. And so he's going to share with us his knowledge, the author of many books, articles on the topics. So now yeah, we can change it actually. We can.
This is fine.
Oh.
Okay, so I'll just from here give the presentation. So a curious title which involves geopolitics and other kinds of interesting aspects, and all the different kinds of changes which are currently occurring in the region, and what that means on the regional scale, global scale, these kinds of different scales. Now, first of all, I mean, what is the implication of geopolitics? I mean, if you boil it down to its most basic value and application, geopolitics is about managing global rivalry. And the success of it is the ability of an actor to keep their coalition together and to pursue their interests and their centre of power, while at the same time denying their opponent the ability to spread their influence and to disrupt things. So it's set in quite binary terms of success or failure. Now, back in 1997, Brzezinski stated that the US, in order to maintain its rise as the global hegemony after the collapse of the Cold War system, in the grand chessboard, stated that there are three strategic imperatives of the US. And the first one is in terms of what he called vassal states, to keep them from colluding with each other and to keep them security dependent. So that's the vassal states. And the new tributary states, to keep them protected and pliant. And the third category of states, which were the opposing states, and that was to prevent them from coming together in order to ever be able to be in a position to challenge US global hegemony. And if we look back on that currently, and in 2016 Brzezinski did, each of those three imperatives are failing. And if we look at this through the prism of regionalism, it produces quite an interesting result. And this regionalism is very much a man-made or conceived idea. And it's, once more, it's binary. It's either to maintain one's position, interests, or to lose interests. So it's opposing scale. And formally speaking, it's quite often to do with the state and its pursuit of interests and opportunities, whether they be political, military, economic, etc. And in this regard, it's about extending one's interest and influence. Now, these are quite often narrated, and they are narrated in different terms of inclusion and exclusion. And so it can include things like including or excluding a particular region, a particular actor, be it a country or a non-state actor. It can be ideas, it can be different things. So those are all important, and it's sometimes even going down to the particular level where ideas which are set in binary realities, if we're to call them that, such as to accept or reject the notion of democracy or security or international law or these kinds of concepts. Now, looking back, what has happened, and especially what one can even say that the first signs of moving away from a rather risky but somewhat stable situation of the Cold War, the first sign of that actually one could see happening in the region before the Cold War was actually ended. And that was when the United States and its allies went to war against Iraq in 1990-91, because it knew the Soviet Union was more or less finished and unable to support or intervene. And bearing in mind, it was just 1 year earlier that Iraq had finished its 9-year war with Iran, which was promoted and sustained by US and its allies. So these things can quickly turn very suddenly and sharply. But my focus is more on what has been happening since 9/11, so this 2001. And this is where the issue of branding and reputation management are most important, because it's not necessarily the objective physical reality that is important, because what these particular events create is a crisis, and the core of the crisis is the physical event, but around each crisis there's constantly moving and shifting flows of information, and people tend to focus on that information because it's easier to access or other different reasons, and so for them the reality is what they believe in those information flows rather than the physical reality, and that's what they react to. So one of these concepts which has come about from 9/11 is this idea of global war on terrorism, which has undergone a number of different rebrandings. It started tentatively when George Bush inadvertently said crusade against terrorism, and he was quickly zipped because this was too much, this clash of civilizations, and presenting a whole lot of problems, especially when it comes to that first, those imperatives. It's keeping the vassal states from colluding, and if a number of your vassal states come from the Islamic world, this is one thing which will be sure to isolate them. And so when that got shifted to global war on terrorism, Obama tried to briefly rebrand that once more to Overseas Contingency Operation, which I think almost no one remembers, but rather this global war on terrorism. But this is the idea, and if we look at it as a regionalism, this is focusing in Central Asia, the Middle East area. And it's this security dimension, so you can see those different aspects of regionalisms which I was talking about before. And it's also about gaining additional tributary states, as well as extending one's influence. Now, nominally, the war is against terrorism. However, if one looks at the results, which most people do not, then a good place to start is Brown University have a cost of war project which they keep going. And from 2001 until 2014,